what charge did you believe he committed?
So Ronald Ritchie was what everybody's calling the 911 caller. What he did was after, and there's a video that shows that he was walking around, him and his wife, inside the Walmart for an hour before he even saw John Crawford. And so when he saw John Crawford, who was on the phone with the BB rifle in his hand, he decided that he was going to call 911 and put this man's life in jeopardy. And by that, I mean he's made a bunch of accusatory comments, lies really. And, it was a big setup. He said he was pointing the gun at people. He's pointing the gun at 2 children. The video afterwards showed that that wasn't true.
Beaver Creek 911, where's your emergency?
I'm at the Beaver Creek Walmart. There's a gentleman walking around with a gun in the store.
It was that 911 call made in August 2014 by the man walking in here, Ronald Ritchie, that led to police called to the store.
What's he doing now?
He looks like he's just trying to load it. He just pointed at like 2 children.
When they got there, John Crawford III is shot dead. And
so he was the one that started the whole ball of rolling. The dispatcher even asked him 2 to 3 times to confirm, are you sure he's pointing the gun at people? And he said yes. And at one point he very excitedly said, he just pointed at 2 children. I saw the interview with the BCI, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And what they did was they let him talk his way through his version of what he saw. And then they showed him the video. And there were obvious discrepancies between what he said and what was shown on the video. So what the investigators did, and they did it with the officers too, is coached him through the video and allowed him to readjust his comments to fit what was seen on the video. They never once challenged him about the lies, the very obvious lies that he told. So that just gave me the impression that they were on a mission to avoid bringing justice in this case. They really didn't want to hold these officers accountable for what was obvious, murder.
Now, Jim, let me interrupt you real quickly. Part of the DOJ statement is that there was no willful intent, and numerous reasons why they could not, charge the officers. But what Ronald Ritchie did seems willful and it seems deliberate. I know you can't get into his head, but what do you think prompted him to call 911?
I think that he was adverse to the idea of a black man walking around with a gun in his hand, what he thought was an assault rifle. And how dare this black man walk around, so bold and calm and collected, with a rifle in his hand in public. And, and even how dare he even occupy space, doing such. So, later on we filed grievances with the court about the way the whole situation was handled, but also a court action to prosecute Ronald Ritchie.
So a year and a half later, Bomani Moyanda and a group of activists filed affidavits with Fairborn Municipal Court in hopes of having Ronald Ritchie charged. They say the video and 911 audio sync to prove some of what Ritchie told dispatchers wasn't really happening.
Well, I think he knows that there's people like me, like us out here, who are just not going to let this go and turn our heads.
On Tuesday, a Fairborn judge ruled there is probable cause to accuse Ritchie of making false alarms for that 911 call, a first-degree misdemeanor, a victory for Bomani. Attorney Michael Wright for John Crawford III's family.
The family's happy that something is moving forward, but ultimately, Ritchie is not the blame. The blame is the police department.
And what was interesting about that was I boiled it down to 3 charges. One of them was making false comments, creating a false alarm. And there were 2 other charges I found that were very similar to that. And I threw in involuntary manslaughter charge also, to charge him with. The judge in Fairborn found probable cause for him to be charged with creating false alarms. So, and she turned it over to the city attorney who recused herself because she said she works every day with the Beaver Creek police and it wouldn't be proper. But what she did, and I'm sure she did this on orders from up above, she appointed Mark Pietmeyer, who led the grand jury to decide not to bring charges. And the reason I said he led the grand jury is because I watched his press conference the morning of the decision. They released the video that same day. And he actually referred to Ronald Ritchie as a guy who was trying to be a good citizen by reporting what he saw.
From time to time. The fact that the 911 caller is familiar with guns. A lot of people in that store, as we're watching this video, they don't even notice Mr. Crawford. They just walk right by him. But the 911 caller, and again, he's trying to be a good citizen, reporting as best he can what he's seeing. He calls up. If he's not there that day, we may not be here.
But the video showed that he did not report what he saw. He reported some made-up incidents and reported several total lies, which sparked the officers to come in, and then they literally shot him on the spot. I mean, there was less than a third of a second between, now not 3 seconds or 1 second, but a third of a second between the time the cop hollered, dropped the weapon, until the time he shot him twice. Just a fraction of a second, like he never intended to give him a chance to drop it. I think he just wanted to make sure he killed him, and anyone in their right mind could see that. And I really think that the reason that the Attorney General, who was running for re-election, keep in mind, could afford to be seen as standing in the gap for a black person. Like he would have lost, his followers and probably lost his re-election. So by kicking it upstairs, so to speak, to the Department of Justice, where he already knew that the bar is so high, for them to recommend a prosecution, that nothing was going to happen. Now, he wasn't going to, it was going to take years, which it did. It took about 3 years for them to decide. And that it was just going to fall flat. And it came out just as I think him and John Kasich wanted it to, and he could walk away seemingly, with his hands clean, and since then he's been rewarded by becoming governor. He won his re-election to Attorney General, and the next thing you know, he's governor.
Now, do you think that it was because of, the various police brutality cases? Do you think it was easy for the officers involved to believe the narrative, to believe what Ronald Ritchie was saying?
I think they would have been inclined to believe what the dispatcher told them, but it was also their responsibility to assess the situation once they arrived. If they had taken time, they would have seen that he was lazily pointing the weapon towards the floor, very casually, not pointing it at anyone. And he had his phone in his left hand, the phone in his left hand, and the rifle down here, kind of swinging it back and forth. So if they would have taken the time to assess this situation like they were supposed to, then within 2, 3, 4 seconds, they would have realized that he was no threat. Now, Pete Meyer, he also interjected that the cops had been through a training, active shooter training, just 2 weeks prior to that incident.
Officer training 2 weeks prior. It's good training, it's what they're taught. But just 2 weeks before this, they're told, if you got a situation like this, you got to bust your tail and get in there and confront it.
However, one of the key factors is there was no active shooter. No shots had been fired, but he used that anyway to sway the grand jury, I mean, that's my opinion. I wasn't in the room, but just listening to him and watching his demeanor and what he said about Ronald Ritchie being a good citizen, reporting what he saw, the thing about that statement is that he said that Ronald Ritchie called a dispatcher, he called 911, and he was trying to be a good citizen by reporting what he saw. Well, he obviously knew different, but really what he indicated was that if you create a situation that ends up in the murder of a black man, then that's being a good citizen. That's kind of like the unspoken, very racist indication.
Now, you sort of, intimated to the way the case progressed with Ronald Ritchie, but why do you think ultimately that particular case ended without him being charged?
Well, I think that, once again, I believe that Mike DeWine led the whole process, from behind the scenes. And he was the one who appointed Pete Meyer in the first place. And I'm pretty sure he had something to do with Pete Meyer being reappointed to squash the Ronald Ritchie case. I mean, it was real, at the very least, he could have been charged with creating false alarms. And what the judge said, that the statement that he made about John Crawford pointing the gun at 2 children, she said that didn't happen. And that's why she recommended that charge. Pete Meyer, when he announced the decision not to prosecute, he said, this is a man, he was in the military, he knows about guns, blah, blah, blah. Well, it didn't have anything to do with any of that. The charge was based on what he said, not what he knew. So, I don't know, it's just, an awful situation anyway around, but the driving factor, I believe, was that Mike DeWine was running for re-election, and he wasn't about to have white officers prosecuted for killing a black man, because white people, they like that. They've shown it, and, in all these police brutality cases, they always find a way to justify these murders.
Now, do you think that particular outcome is going to give license for more people, white, black, or otherwise, to accuse unarmed black people of crimes they're not committing and will ultimately end in the murder of more?
I think it's happened ever since. There's now a black person can't even knock on a door and ask for help without getting shot. They're shooting like little kids and killing little 8, 9-year-old children now. So it's never stopped. There were, even after the murder of George Floyd, cop killings escalated. There were more cop killings in 2021 and more in 2022. It's just escalated. Like it's really popular in the minds of white people to kill or justify the killing of black people. Like it's taken us back, into the Jim Crow era and even before.
And so without the help of the justice system, the killings will continue.
Well, it's more like with the help of the justice systems, the killings will continue because they, 99% of the time, they find a way to justify it. The one case that they couldn't get around was George Floyd, because it was just all too obvious, and there was outrage across the globe, not just the country, but all around the world, and so that's one that they couldn't get away with, but shortly after that, there was the young man, the cop shot him in the back, point blank, 7 times. They justified that. The man is paralyzed. He can't take care of his children. They seem to be just as intent now to rip black families apart through the use of violence as they were pre-Jim Crow.
So it continues.
It continues, and I don't know if it's ever going to stop. There's only like one way to stop it, but I don't know if if we got the will and the courage to do it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave it there.
Okay.
Now that Fairborn judge has ruled there's probable cause, it will be up to Greene County's prosecutor to file a complaint, arrest, or prosecute Ronald Ritchie for making false alarms for what happened here. We're told Ritchie has left the state. The prosecutor could also decide to do none of those things.
What did the no indictment mean for the justice system, the no indictment for the John Crawford III murder?
Essentially what it meant was that the murder of unarmed black people is seen as a legitimate means for the Justice Department to excuse. So it really set in motion these series, I'll say series, of killings across the nation. And I think that the John Crawford case was so blatant, so obvious, that if they were able to get away with that, then anything else would be okay. I think it was a statement to Black America that you are not protected under the law.
And what does that mean specifically for the whole process, the grand jury process, what does that mean? What does it mean when, because a lot of families are hiring civil rights attorneys. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the whole process of trying to get justice for the murder of their family members? But what does that mean about the Department of Justice as well?
There is no justice in the Department of Justice for people of color. What that essentially means is the whole process is bogus. It is not geared to take into account the life of the Black person. It is geared to create an atmosphere to excuse the actions. Whether they're police or civilians, they are allowed to deliberately and willfully create situations where Black men and women are murdered, and there's no recourse. And we don't have any recourse in the courts. We certainly don't have any protection under the law. They have no expectation of justice from a system that from the grand jury to the prosecutor to the Department of Justice, they're all on one accord in denying justice for Black people.
What's the accord? What's the one accord?
What
are they trying to say? Ultimately, what are they saying?
Ultimately, they're saying the same thing that Taney said. The Black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. And I'm speaking to Roger Taney in the Dred Scott case. The established way back then, we have no legitimate right to live free as civilians, as citizens. We cannot have the same expectation of protection under the law that white Americans have. And it's been made crystal clear that you can go as far as the Supreme Court and not get one iota of consideration to see this Black human being as valuable in any sense.
But we had the cameras, we saw what happened, we have laws that protect us. What went wrong?
It's white supremacy at its best. When you can take a video that shows specifically the crime that was committed and the culprit who committed it and dismiss it on the basis that what do you think you saw, or what you think you saw was not what happened, and we are not going to honor and respect that as reality. That's what's wrong. The thing is that the power rests in the hands of people who have no regard for Black life. And our faith in the justice system was not in any way honored. We brought our belief that justice for all existed. We brought our beliefs that this was a country of law and order. We brought into the belief that as American citizens, we had certain rights. All of that has been dispelled. All of that has just been completely thrown out the window. And now we are back into a situation where every time a Black person interacts with a police officer, they are putting their lives on the line. They're taking their lives in their hands. Black people are not safe in America in any way.
Wasn't Pete Meyer, wasn't he on the side of justice? I mean, isn't John Crawford III's murder, it didn't that matter?
No, Piedmeier is on the side of Piedmeier and DeWine and Kasich and all of the corrupt politicians and officers of the court who want to establish in the minds of African Americans everywhere, you have no rights that we are bound to respect. And that's the essence of it right there. And they have created such a convoluted, orchestrated frame in which to carry out these things that every step of the way we are thwarted. You know, if we get an indictment, which is rare, we won't get a conviction. If we get a conviction, it'll be overturned, it'll be appealed, or the person will be let out of jail. You know, never do we get justice on any plane. It's not for us.
The DOJ says, though, that there was no civil rights violation.
The 2017 Department of Justice report stated, to establish willfulness, federal authorities would be required to show that the officer acted with the deliberate and specific intent to do something the law forbids. This is one of the highest standards of intent imposed by law. Mistake, misperception, negligence, necessity, or poor judgment are not sufficient to establish a federal criminal civil rights violation. To establish that Officer Williams acted willfully, the government will be required both to disprove his stated reason for the shooting, that he was in fear of death or serious bodily injury, and to affirmatively establish that Officer Williams instead acted with a specific intent to violate Mr. Crawford's rights. The evidence here simply cannot satisfy those burdens. Accordingly, the review into this incident has been closed without prosecution.
Ohio is an open carry state. Even if John III had been carrying a real weapon, he still was not violating any ordinance or creating any problem or committing any crime. The fact that he had a gun in his hand was not sufficient legitimate evidence for him to be shot and killed.
Officer was in fear of his life.
The officer didn't even give him a chance to say one syllable, not one word. The officer came in ready to shoot. The officer approached him with his guns blazing. And the idiocy of a person carrying a pretend weapon, a toy, to actually turn towards someone with a real weapon is so far-fetched that it is totally unbelievable. And the tape proves that. You know, John made no effort. He had no time to make any effort to do anything that could have been considered as threatening in any way. He was startled. He was absolutely startled because he was talking on the phone, minding his business, and all of a sudden, there's a man with a gun in his face. So this is bogus, just bogus. And the consistency of the lies carries all the way up the line, from Ronald Ritchie to Mike DeWine to Piedmeier to the Department of Justice, all in sync that no, we are not going to condemn white policemen for murdering black people.
Well, in the DOJ, the last thing it says that Officer Williams did not act in any specific intent to violate Mr. Crawford's rights.
So if I walk up to you and with my fist balled up to punch you in the face, I have to say I wasn't really intending to hit you. It's the same scenario. You know, he was definitely determined and had already decided when he entered the store that he was going to shoot John. It was absolute deliberate and intentional, and without any remorse or recourse.
Now, I noticed that you have your Black Panther Party shirt on.
Yes, I do.
The Black Panther Party started in part because of the killing of unarmed black kids. They were young,
Right.
in Oakland.
Right.
And the protests have been going on since.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the protests and the marches and the policy changes, do you think all that was done in vain?
I think that without that, it would only be worse. I think that the ultimate goal that we seek since 1966 has never been achieved. Still, the police kill black men and women with total immunity. They have no responsibility. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. But it is more or less our duty, our responsibility to let it be known where we stand with that. Not just let it happen and say nothing.
Now, the Black Panther Party took up arms for self-defense, primarily for self-defense. Is that an option today?
It's the way to go. It's a strategy.
Community take up arms, or would there have to be an organized group of people who could take up arms and create self-defense and protection?
I think that's a very interesting question that could be explored and debated in the Black community.
How so?
In that, do we support the proliferation of weapons in our community in terms of a militia or a people's army, or do we feel that any indication that we might be leaning towards self-defense, and the Black Panther Party initially was labeled, the name, Black Panther Party for self-defense. It seems that may be a call to arms for white supremacists. So, we're in a very precarious situation. Whatever happens, we have got to do more to protect ourselves, our children, and our people from the oppressor, the armed occupation troop that rides through our neighborhoods. Not to serve and protect, but to kill, contain, and steal.
So we've been marching for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Civil rights movement, prior to the civil rights movement. Is that antiquated? Are we done with the protest and the marching?
I think so. I think that we need to move in a different direction. I think that the empathy that was stirred in the 50s and early 60s from other people in the United States towards the plight of Black people has dissipated. I don't think that it does any good to hold a vigil, to march when the people that held the power are turning a deaf ear and a blind eye to what's going on. So all of that visible protest has lost any real strength. And the frequency with which Black people are murdered has kind of dulled the senses of people who may be in some way sympathetic. So I think it's really at a stage where we have got to take our organizing to a more in-depth, internal, in terms of internal in the Black community, to organize, not necessarily to protest in front of the culprits, but to bring some kind of safety net into our community.
Will there ever be a solution? Will there ever be change?
Well, to be honest with you, not in my lifetime, but that doesn't mean it won't ever happen. I believe it's necessary to continue to fight.